A quick note for those who are witnesses wondering if I'm an apostate. You and I can both agree that a central motivation of so-called apostates is to draw ones away from the organization, generally after themselves, right? You will hear no such message from me. Let me be clear on this point. Despite my grievances towards this religion, I would be greatly distressed to learn that you left because of anything I've said. No, my message is that if you believe in this religion, you should stay and fight for it. Hey everyone, great to have you. Thanks as always for popping by. So this video comes to you by request. If you follow my channel, you know that I am generally focused on manifestation or the law of attraction. Today's video will be a little different. I'm definitely going to talk about manifestation. There's an element of this that is even inseparable from the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses. But I have to be candid that I do have ulterior motives with this video. For those of you who don't know, I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I left a number of years ago. And it's been eating at me that I've never really explained my background and position publicly. If you're a member of this religion, you may be surprised to learn that many of your fellow worshippers, even ones who hold position, and of course many who've withdrawn as well, repeatedly ask why I left and what my views of this religion are. When information is just a click away in this day and age, ignorance is a choice. And believe it or not, I'm not entirely directing that comment at the witnesses, who are typically quite weary of the tired accusation that they live in a kind of cultish bubble. I'm actually directing that statement equally at those who've left. Ignorance is a choice. You can have the world at your fingertips, yet be incredibly selective about what you choose to see. I suppose the main takeaway I'd like people to have when watching this, and it applies to all relationships, not just witnesses and ex-witnesses, is that there exists a way of having really difficult conversations with friends and family. It will amaze you how far people are willing to come when you just allow for them to think and permit for their perspective. When people leave this religion, they often feel that they'll lose their entire family. If you're contemplating such a move, you should be prepared for some losses, yes. But you will be floored by how many fair and open-minded people there are who will give your insights a hearing ear when you conduct a conversation in this specific and effective way. Today, I'm going to tell you about my background with them, why the Jehovah's Witnesses matter, why I left, what I think of some of their biggest scandals receiving so much media attention today, some considerations for those who contemplate leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses or who struggle to see life outside of it, and then I'd like to discuss a philosophy of mind that is compatible with virtually all religions, including the Witnesses, which might assist you in feeling a little more positively about life and existence. Let's get started. Hey good people, I'm Derek London. Thanks for checking out my channel. Around here we talk about everything law of attraction. We discuss a lot about the psychological, scientific, and rational basis for subscribing to this philosophy of mind. And in fact, if your reality could stand some change for the better, you have only to start there, with your mind. Hit that subscribe button and settle in, because your life will never be the same. So I'd like to begin by telling you that if you hold a strong position toward the witnesses, that is, if you hate the religion, or if it's your entire world, I promise there will be plenty in this video to offend everyone. Make no mistake, there are criticisms I hold toward the leadership of this group. Criticisms that even the governing body does not hold as thoroughly baseless and hostile in themselves. Granted, there will be many who dogmatically call me an apostate and write me off as the devil incarnate. I have no control over that. But I believe most see that intentions matter. And I actually don't think that these rigid ones are in any sense representative of the religion as a whole. I've come to greatly admire many Jehovah's Witnesses in their capacity for nuance and open-mindedness. A quick note for those who are witnesses wondering if I'm an apostate. You and I can both agree that a central motivation of so-called apostates is to draw ones away from the organization, generally after themselves, right? You will hear no such message from me. Let me be clear on this point. Despite my grievances towards this religion, I would be greatly distressed to learn that you left because of anything I've said. No, my message is that if you believe in this religion, you should stay and fight for it. Don't be misled by those who tend to make the most amount of noise out there. Dogmatism is something that exists within and without the religion. The Jehovah's Witnesses are people first, and they are every bit as rational and intelligent as anybody else. Alternatively, not everyone who leaves this group is angry and bent on burning this society to the ground either. It seems when you go on YouTube to try to find a respectful presentation of facts that are not, you could say, pro-Jehovah's Witness, it's an increasingly difficult thing to find. In this video, I would like to make a departure from the typical way this conversation is being held. It's not just going to be a bunch of fluff about the witnesses. Trust me, I will bring up some very serious grievances against the leadership of this group. But there's something about this topic that is almost never raised. And being that witnesses are admonished not to have public platforms like this, that's why these certain facts you're about to hear so rarely see the light of day. So let me start by telling you my story. I was born into this religion. All of my immediate family belonged to this religion. Most of my distant relatives did too, although a handful of them have left, including me. I was fairly zealous from a young age. I got baptized by the age of 13 and was a part-time minister right out of the gate. These are called auxiliary pioneers. They devote a minimum of 50 hours per month to the preaching work. After 2 years of that, I became a full-time minister. Full-time ministers are called regular pioneers. They devote a minimum of 70 hours per month. And I did that for over 5 years. For the latter 2 or 3 years of my full-time ministry, I enrolled in a small group which taught American Sign Language. I was even twice offered a clerical position within the religion, but I turned it down because I felt inadequate. So I worked with them, helping out until the sign language group expanded into a congregation of, I'd say, about 40 people. I actually got quite fluent in it, although my ASL is quite rusty now. Every now and then you'll notice certain of my gestures are what's called classifiers in ASL. For whatever reason, some things have held on and have become mannerisms. I have quite fond memories of working in the deaf group. There were some really good quality people there. Something you don't often hear about this religion, or others such as Scientology, Mormonism, even various sects within Islam, is that for those who are in the center of things, such as I was, these organizations can be incredibly hospitable, loving, inclusive, and diverse places. People of all backgrounds and walks of life are welcome as long as they accept specific axioms or assumptions. Leah Remini, for example, is a famous actress who belonged to the religion of Scientology, who later spoke out against the church quite publicly. She even recently did an exposé feature on A&E, if I'm not mistaken, on the witnesses as well. I actually have a lot of respect and admiration for people like her. But anyway, when you listen to such ones, it's easy to form the perception that they were living in North Korea. It can look very corrupt and evil. It's important to understand, however, that it only appears this way as an outsider or when you want to leave or no longer believe its central claims. When you belong to the religion and you sympathize with it, it's a whole other experience entirely. Most of the people I know among the witnesses are warm, intelligent, honest, hardworking, and welcoming people. And this is how it is whenever you back any cause. Take North Korea, for example. If you don't particularly like the dear leader, the country is worse than the most infernal hell. If you work in the government or military or the arts which are sponsored by such elites, it's wonderful. Even if you're starving to death outside Pyongyang, the party is telling you that things are getting more prosperous, the nation is growing stronger, and after all, you are the most affluent people in the world. This kind of thing happened in the Soviet Union too. It's not a new phenomenon. This is your reality. You don't see beyond those walls because you are a North Korean. This is why nobody rises up against the government. A government cannot dominate a group of people who simply refuse to be dominated. Now, I'm not comparing the JWs to North Korea. I'm comparing all belief systems, communities, witnesses, and ex-witnesses alike to the DPRK. That's a pretty bold statement to make, but if you've ever experienced an ideological change in your life, then you might be able to see what I'm getting at. So the majority of my background in this religion was largely positive. It's not that life was perfect. Witnesses still have difficulties like everyone else. But so far as you knew, life on the outside was dark and cold, because outsiders just don't have the hope that exists on the inside. And even to this day, I'm loath to admit that the brotherhood, the fraternity, and the community that exists in that religion is really quite special and unique. Even most ex-witnesses will agree. That, at least for now, gives you some insight into my background. Now, I'd like to talk about why the Jehovah's Witnesses deserve a little credit. Trust me, if you think this is all going to be softball stuff on the witnesses, you got another thing coming later on in this video. But I want to spend some time on why the Jehovah's Witnesses matter. If you have even a simulacrum of respect for secular values, liberty, freedom, or humanism, I want to talk about why all of us in the developed world owe nothing short of a heartfelt, permanent, and unconditional thank you to the Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, this religion practices excommunication. Yes, many suicides have been attributed to this. Yes, they've been found guilty in some cases of institutional sex abuse cover-ups. Yes, their policies regarding bloodless surgeries have resulted in unnecessary deaths. Yes, they've invested in Boeing, a partly military-funded corporation. Yes, they've invested in the Philip Morris Tobacco Company. Yes, there has been a long-standing affiliation with the Freemasons. And no, they are technically not politically neutral. This is documented. In fact, much of this is even admitted in their own teachings. That's not apostasy. It's not propaganda. It's not smear campaign or lies. There is perfectly reasonable hostility owing to these issues. And I would never excuse such policies and behaviors on the grounds that the witnesses have effected some good in the world. I'll touch on some of these matters momentarily. But the fact that is often, so very often missed, is that the specific rights and freedoms you and I rely upon to keep corporations, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses, governments, and even federative bodies in check, are there in the first place because this same group fought for such rights and freedoms. And I'm not just talking about making a little bit of case law. As I'm about to show you, throughout the democratic world, on the national, multinational, and international level, free speech, expression, the right to congregate, the right to community, the right to medical autonomy, the right to and from religion, the right to publication, all of these and much more have the Jehovah's Witness jurisprudential brilliance written all over them. And I'm sorry, but I simply don't know what to do about that. I can raise my fist and get righteously indignant about the corruptions within. It would be so easy. But the fact that I rely on the very rights and freedoms that these ones have fought so hard to litigate and were persecuted for in countless Kingdom Hall raids and unjust arrests, well, I think you can appreciate my trepidation in judging this group too harshly. Throughout this video, I'm going to suggest perhaps not everything that is said about the Jehovah's Witnesses is quite so cut and dried as you might hear from the malcontents online. I'll be the first to acknowledge when they've crossed the line. But some of these issues, when you really crack into all the surrounding details, are generally quite complicated and worthy of some additional probing. So let's delve right into some of the liberties you and I routinely take for granted, even when we're not ridiculing the witnesses. Let's start with the most important ones here in Canada. In order to obtain religious freedom, the Jehovah's Witnesses popularized the idea of a Canadian Bill of Rights and established numerous libertarian precedents before Canada's highest courts. On June 9, 1947, they presented a petition to Parliament for the enactment of a Bill of Rights with 625,510 signatures. The Canadian Bill of Rights was the precursor of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is part of the Canadian Constitution. You know, something that the West has really come to appreciate over the decades is how important some kind of constitutional guarantee creates a very robust bulwark against the ever-present threat of totalitarianism. It's no trivial thing. It's absolutely sovereign. It's a way of life. So the very first step in this direction here in Canada was made by none other than the Jehovah's Witnesses. It boggles the mind that for all the glory and maudlin theatricality surrounding November 11's Armistice Day, and all the trappings of Churchill worship and patriotic nationalism, and all the bluster the likes of Don Cherry can summon, that faithful 21-gun salute is suspiciously quiet for the courtroom battles waged to install the very thing that distinguishes a democratic government from a dictatorial one, a Bill of Rights. Yes, the troops deserve respect and appreciation. I'm not a surrenderist. Pure pacifists are bound to be annexed by nations less virtuous than those too righteous to pick up a gun. My simple point is that there are other forms of bravery and fortitude warranting our respect. This is to say little of our right to congregate, a liberty often taken for granted by all religious groups, political activists, academic institutions, even book clubs, established in the Chaput versus Romain precedent. This is also to say little about the rights fought in behalf of young people for a degree of medical autonomy, commensurate with their level of maturity, as established in Roncorelli versus Duplessis. Now you can say cynically that they only did this to advance their own agenda on bloodless surgeries. But this is a Supreme Court precedent, which can be appealed to by that same minor who may reject his parents' view toward blood. It's not quite so one-sided as opponents of this religion might think. Interestingly, it looks like this might even provide a basis for mature minors opting for surgical remedies of gender dysphoria. That's something that's actually being discussed in Canadian politics right now. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that mature minors can already take advantage of cross-hormone therapies, which are treatments that are difficult to impossible in reversing. I'm not overtly expressing support for this. My point is that these are freedoms which might not be possible had Jehovah's Witnesses not fought for them. Oh, and this is just Canada, by the way. Here's what Wikipedia has to say about the Jehovah's Witnesses in the United States. In the United States, numerous cases involving Jehovah's Witnesses are now landmark decisions of First Amendment law. In all, Jehovah's Witnesses brought 23 separate First Amendment actions before the U.S. Supreme Court. Justice Harlan Fiske Stone once quipped, "I think the Jehovah's Witnesses ought to have an endowment in view of the aid which they give in solving the legal problems of civil liberties." Now there's a pretty brave endorsement for one of the most powerful voices in the world of that time period. Wikipedia continues, "The most important U.S. Supreme Court legal victory won by the Witnesses was in the case West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett, 1943. In which the court ruled that school children could not be forced to pledge allegiance to or salute the U.S. flag. The Barnett decision overturned an earlier case, Minersville School District v. Gobitis in 1940, in which the court had held that witnesses could be forced against their will to pay homage to the flag. Now, if you're a true blue patriot, you might not see the value in this. But given that one of the most iconic earmarks of a totalitarian government, which we've seen in both the Nazi German and Soviet experiments, is that the citizens become the property of the state. This is a central theme if you have even a passing historical interest on the topic. And the United States might have been just like that, had the witnesses not represented in the hallowed halls of the highest court in America. Now, if this stuff interests you, simply Wikipedia the following phrase: Supreme Court cases involving Jehovah's Witnesses by country. You will discover one by one in Armenia, France, Germany, India, Japan, Philippines, and Russia that perhaps no other group has been more active in standing up for civil liberties than the Jehovah's Witnesses. Time and again, in cases where the witnesses haven't directly established court precedent, the European Court of Human Rights have upheld and endorsed them in their evangelization, publication, congregation, and abstention from displays of patriotism in military service. It's hugely ironic in my mind that one of the more fundamentalist and extreme sectarian branches of Christianity can also be one of the greatest paladins of secular values. Now, this is more of a top-down view of the organization. I'd like to take just a moment to discuss some of the bottom-up virtues exhibited by adherents of this religion. As annoying and self-serving as their door-to-door proselytization can be, it's tremendously rare and unique how accessible they are, and the degree to which they organize themselves, not just in preaching their message, but the very underrated role they play in society by assisting drug, alcohol, and nicotine-addicted individuals, and recidivists who want to change. Their young are often far more exemplary for being well-mannered, responsible, respectful to authority, hardworking, honest, and charitable than their more modernist counterparts. I believe a decent measure of this can be attributed to the traditional values impressed upon them from a tender age. Now, while their policies of excommunication certainly contradict their stated family values, I'll reiterate that families who belong to this society are otherwise generally very close-knit, welcoming, cooperative, and peace-loving. There are a lot of redeeming things to say about the Jehovah's Witnesses. As I now turn to the darker elements in this religion, I wish to make clear that my statements, judgments, and relationships with its members are solely on an individual basis. There are generalizations and stereotypes which can be drawn about any group, but a common sentiment floating around out there, especially among those who've left, is that there's something implicit in the doctrines that radicalizes people or makes them dogmatic. I'll agree that there are certain institutional policies and attitudes which can measurably exacerbate the level of fundamentalism and zealotry that already exists. But the idea that there is something innately corrupting about this organization or its teachings is simply not true in my opinion. This is a very common idea that people get when they leave this religion. These kinds of people often go from one sense of ultimate truth to another, to another, to another. I've observed that the fairer I've attempted to engage with my family and former church fellows, the more I allowed for them to maintain their identity and dignity, the further they were willing to come in allowing for my perspective. This is a very rewarding exchange to be a part of. It will completely restore your faith in humanity. If and when people come around to your way of thinking, which should never be your motivation, by the way, it will not be due to dropping knowledge bombs on them or dismantling their deeply held convictions. Trust me, everyone has doubts. Even ex-witnesses have their doubts. Jehovah's Witnesses know in their heart of hearts where their blind spots are, however safely they guard them. If a change does come about, it'll only happen in response to your repeated assurance that coexistence is possible and that you value their perspective, period. This is not a pretense on my part. I think I've shown that I genuinely value the perspective of my witness friends and family. While I consider myself very knowledgeable on these topics, I am daily made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. So let's get started on some of the negative aspects in this religion. For my friends and family not prepared to hear my reasons for leaving, that's fine. Enter at your own discretion. But I did leave the witnesses for reasons. It wasn't completely arbitrary, It wasn't because I found the standards too high. It wasn't because I wanted to pursue my own fleshly desires. This is every bit as unfair to assume as me saying you believe what you do because it offers you consolation and hope. It's a genetic fallacy and has no place in rational discourse. I left the Jehovah's Witnesses primarily because I think the doctrines are untrue. And my opinions about the disfellowshipping arrangement, the organization's investments, its mishandling of child abuse cases, its political activism masquerading as neutrality, its historical affiliations with the Freemasons, and other things I'll discuss, were not the actual reasons I left, nor do I think those should necessarily be the grounds for leaving. Look, there remain 1 billion Catholics following nearly 2 millennia of institutional corruption. Anti-witness activists should grow the hell up and realize that if the Catholics can hold on to its members, so can the witnesses too. This has nothing to do with the character of its adherents. I left, and I believe the only ever valid reason for abandoning a cause you once believed, despite its corruptions, is if that belief wanes into unbelief. If you leave simply because of politics, but still accept its basic assumptions, that will haunt you. If you're one of my friends or family members and are curious about why I no longer trust the truth claims made by the governing body, you'll have to reach out to me privately and we can talk about it then. Now let's talk about excommunication. From a legal perspective, I actually agree with the Supreme Court of Canada where I live. I think they upheld the Constitution, ruling in favor of the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'll explain why momentarily. Morally, however, I think the disfellowshipping and disassociation arrangement is absolutely reprehensible. It's so outdated and harsh. And when you combine this with mishandling of child sexual abuse, it actually does become legally problematic for the witnesses. The moral issue before us is that triangulating people's social and familial circle is simply a crappy thing to do. You have a mere difference of opinion, and so now you go around telling others they should shun their own family members? Come on. Having said that, there is room for nuance here. First of all, the governing body has released very conflicting prescriptions on how to deal with excommunicated family and friends. On the one hand, the following is written in a July 2009 Awake article entitled, "Is It Wrong to Change Your Religion?" It says this: although the Bible makes a clear distinction between true and false teachings, God allows each person the freedom to choose how he or she will respond. No one should be forced to worship in a way that he finds unacceptable or be made to choose between his beliefs and his family. The direct link to the official website of the Jehovah's Witnesses where this is written will be linked below in the description. Alternatively, as many members of this group know, there are countless other places where they have prescribed such behaviors as strict avoidance in the What Does the Bible Really Teach book. Members also know that there are cases where interaction with certain excommunicated friends and family may result in punitive measures, including disfellowshipping. Oddly, prior to the disfellowshipping arrangement, the witnesses were vocal in their publications about how unscriptural it was of the Catholics to observe such a terrible practice. The link for that will be included below in the description as well. For unbelievers, we see this as manipulation and gaslighting. But if you're inclined to believe the society, chances are you'll either take one of the two contradictory positions on disfellowshipping, and many witnesses do this, by the way, or you'll split the difference and just limit your association, but not necessarily shun anyone. You may take the additional pain to cover your tracks and just keep your associations private. I know many witnesses who do that too. Now, this is why I say there's room for nuance here. I obviously can't reconcile the two statements which seem so palpably at odds with one another. Having said that, I refuse to believe that all members of this group are really so heartless as to practice overt shunning. Furthermore, there's a level of ambiguity in the use of that word force in the 2009 Awake. I suppose if it meant physical force, a witness could maintain some consistency in their position. I don't accept this personally because shunning is a very bold instantiation of coercive force. It may not be physical, but it's still force. Now, the disfellowshipping arrangement has become very concatenated with a generally more legal issue. In many Commonwealth countries, my native Canada included, this arrangement has served to silence victims of rape within the religion. It has been established in specific legal cases that this served to institutionalize child sexual abuse. It's very ugly. We're currently talking about excommunication. I'll touch on some of the institutional sex abuse cover-ups, mishandling of reporting statutes, and other issues later. But so far as we're concerned with disfellowshipping on its own, this remains largely a moral issue for me. It's also highly subjective. There's sufficient ambiguity in what the society has said, the practical way in which it's actually handled from case to case, the various ways certain things can be interpreted, and so on, which just doesn't make this cut and dried. Let me be clear. I have profound amount of sympathy for those who've been cut off from their entire social network. Having been a victim of this treatment myself to some degree, you can rest assured that I feel your pain. I'm not trying to be an apologist for immoral triangulation or weaponization of one's social structure and shunning. Here's another thing about excommunication that's also nuanced. Just because this has happened to you from inside the Jehovah's Witness organization doesn't in any way protect you from such a reality outside the group. When it's institutionalized, it's somehow worse. I'd agree with that. But have you taken the time to analyze just how common shunning is? Many non-witnesses arbitrarily cut off family members and friends. Not only that, but it's actually your right to do so. Sometimes this is necessary for your own sanity or to protect those who may rely on you. It may be a very important part of parenting to cut off all unhealthy influences upon your children. I can conceive of many situations where this is a necessary action for those with moral dependence in their care. And the deeply saddening reality is that some people who are victims of such treatment, whether it happens at a church, or it happens at a school, or even in a family of atheists, sometimes it's a contributing factor in why one self-harm or even commit suicide. It's a harsh reality that I have absolutely no consistent solution for. Yes, the institutionalization of it is quite corrupt, but when even a marital unit composed of two people is considered an institution, how far can we really take it? And that's also why I support the most recent unanimous 9-judge Supreme Court ruling here in Canada. I agree completely with Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin when she said that the courts may not have the legitimacy to assist in resolving a dispute about the greatest hockey player of all time, about a bridge player who's left out of his regular weekly game night, or about a cousin who thinks she should have been invited to a wedding. Aside from issues where this becomes intersectional with infringements upon one's constitutional rights, such as in the previously mentioned instance of sexual abuse cover-ups, censorship, discrimination of sexual identity, or more involved cases, aside from situations of that nature, excommunication in itself is not really a legal issue, it's a moral one. As much as I sympathize and wish it were not so, and would use my dying breath to condemn such inhuman behavior, where I witnessed the genuine article, I have absolutely no consistent solutions to offer. But please don't assume that all Jehovah's Witnesses are evil and cruel people. They're not. There are some profoundly warm and unconditionally loving members who would sooner die before they bullied or ostracized a soul. It's just not a simple problem. Before we move on to other things, you're likely wondering why I haven't officially disassociated myself from the witnesses. To be honest, I've been very torn about this. Part of me wants to go on the record and renounce such an affiliation. There are many things about my, you could say, titular membership to this group that brings me embarrassment. Most of the reasons I can think to disassociate center around ego, reputation, and pride. But then there is the other side of things that have prompted me to not disassociate. One, anyone who knows me is well aware that I'm not in fact a witness. So what do I really have to gain by it? Two, what relationships I do have with those who are still members will be needlessly strained going forward. I know the witnesses can't hurt me. All the people in my life now will be there whether I'm disassociated or not. But the most important reason, 3, is that I don't want to legitimize a system that is completely illegitimate to begin with. I was baptized long before I reached the age of reason, period. And if I genuinely disagree with excommunication, as I say I do, then why would I even participate in such games? I suppose if I were coerced into a judicial committee, I'd simply disassociate. But this would have to be initiated by a witch hunt on their part. Besides, these secretive all-male inquisitions are really something from the 15th and 16th centuries. It's just not how any serious business is conducted anymore in our modern world. I would insist on a public video recorded hearing if I were forced into this, and that would simply be a non-starter for them. They have policies on that. Anyway, that's about as much as I want to say on excommunication. Another big issue that has attracted so much media attention is on their position regarding bloodless medical treatments. The biggest part about this whole problem, and it's the first thing witnesses will tell you on this subject, is that their stance on blood is fundamentally a religious one. I think their scientifically based views on bloodless medical procedures are generally sustainable. I don't agree with all of them, mind you, but they are grounded in reason. Where I think the issue becomes silly is in those few cases when the only solution is a transfusion of whole blood. That's when a Jehovah's Witness will cease making rational scientific arguments and resort to religious entitlement. This is the definition of fundamentalism. It's my opinion that the final refuge of the indefensible coward, once he has exhausted all argument, is to insist upon his view by appealing to the following words: because it's against my religion. But this is precisely why much of the modern world has become impatient and fatigued towards religion. It's things like this where people can abuse their right to religion and insist on their way based on a technicality, why so many are fed up with believers getting a free pass on everything. It's like Sikhs and motorcycle helmets. The witness's stance on blood is statistically irrelevant, but it's annoying. Now, where this issue gets muddled up with the excommunication issue is where I think Jehovah's Witnesses earn every bit the scorn they receive from the public. You know, just when somebody is at their worst health, say they've been in a terrible car accident or get injured at work in providing for their family, now they have to trouble themselves with medical decisions based on what their religiously weaponized social structure thinks of it. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if the organization can be held accountable for damages of this sort. But I think that all fair-minded people can see how immoral this is. If you're a witness, look, it's your body, and I appreciate your reasons for being against whole blood procedures. But you have to see where this gets a little ridiculous. It's not an unreasonable objection. Okay, so that's the blood issue. Now, historical connections to the Freemasons. Beyond disconfirming the governing body's claim to divinely backed leadership, I find this scandal intensely uninteresting. The witnesses haven't even evaded this in their literature. Yes, they downplay it in the Proclaimer's book, but people got to get over it. There are far greater reasons to reject the governing body's monopoly on God. It's low-hanging fruit. It's a nothing burger. And it makes ex-witnesses look parochial. We need to stop focusing on it. Moving on. Yes, okay, let's talk about investments. This affair is kind of fun in my opinion. So as you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses are largely tax exempted as a religious organization. Therefore, much of their transactions are a matter of public record. The National Center for Charitable Statistics report on such organizations. When I last researched this a couple of years ago, the NCCS aren't technically authorized by the IRS, but they were recognized by them as a legitimate record keeper on such investments. Anyway, the documents show that Jehovah's Witnesses invest in stocks. Not least of their beneficiaries include corporations such as Boeing, which at the time of my researching this, made about 40% of its revenue from the military. But that's not all. They were found to invest in Philip Morris, a tobacco company. They invested in Monsanto. They invest in Chevron and other oil and gas companies. Listen, if you had a little racket where millions of people worldwide voluntarily contribute monthly donations to you, you'd be an idiot not to invest. I'm the first to admit that I'm an evil capitalist. I would do the exact same thing. But for you witnesses out there, here's where it's kind of fun. Suppose I held position in the organization, and it came to light publicly that I was investing in a recreational marijuana startup, or the National Rifle Association, or Pall Mall cigarettes. How do you speculate I would be treated upon such a revelation? I have nothing against investment. I respect it. Besides, active Jehovah's Witnesses support the cause. Who would really blame them for doubling voluntary donations? Don't be naive. Heaven forbid somebody try to make a little money around here. It's not that I'm focusing on. I'm just humored by the hypocrisy in their choice of investments, and you should be too. On another lighthearted note, which got some online attention, there's a pretty interesting video out there where Tony Morris took the Sunday morning off to do a little whiskey shopping. Turns out he has pretty expensive taste. I was curious why he needed to buy over a case of hard liquor at once. Now, before you roll your eyes at me, I only bring this up for a laugh. This would be a little troubling to me if I were on the other side, believing the governing body was God's only channel he was using to speak to his chosen people. But when you're on this side of things, I'm more just inclined to tip my hat to him for at least having decent taste in liquor. Hey, if you're going to live out your days as a constipated homophobe who hates tight pants, another reference worth looking up if you're a witness, I mean Jesus, the last thing a guy needs is to imbibe on subpar scotch. So seeing as we're all on the same level here, I say drink up, Brother Morris. God bless your hard-working liver. Okay, so that last item I mentioned is all fun and games. It's a pretty harmless criticism. There's not much scandal value there, at least in a post-Trump world. But assigning regular, fallible human opinion the authority of divine utterance will take you to some pretty frightening territory. Now, I give the Jehovah's Witnesses full marks for calling out this kind of misguided fealty, especially when it takes on the flavor of patriotic nationalism, identity politics, unquestioning devotion to king and country, and other varieties of state religion. Few groups call out such stupidity better than the Jehovah's Witnesses, actually. But in my opinion, you run into this exact same corruption when you vest an all-male panel in Brooklyn with the referendum of the Most High, or when your loyalties trump familial obligation, conscience, and freedom of thought. In fairness, not everyone in this religion accepts such authority in their life unconditionally. I have met witnesses, even ones with position, who possess a slightly more democratic and critical eye upon the so-called faithful and discreet slave. But if you're a witness, let's be perfectly honest with ourselves. Practically speaking, nothing trumps the final word of the governing body. Oh, you can predictably say that the Bible does, but when this group has the authority or exclusive access, into proper scriptural interpretation or understanding, you have made a distinction without a difference. Listen closely. What good is biblical authority when they've convinced you that they alone hold the key to its interpretation? Now, this is where such loyalty gets very ugly in what I'm about to lay out. Hypocritically, this religion admonishes its members to pay Caesar's things unto Caesar. But when it comes to following very basic, commonsensical, and humane statutes regarding the disclosure of sexual abuse to law enforcement, the leadership of this group insists upon backward, Bronze Age policies in adjudicating the veracity of such abuse claims. This is really beginning to cost some money in certain places around the world, and it serves to protect the worst kind of society's wrongdoers. Now, it's true that the authorities shouldn't have unmitigated access to the vault, so to speak, and nor are secular authorities even asking for that. It's also true that false accusations of child molestation exist. It's true that religious institutions can be held legally liable for the mishandling of such confidences or documentation to the government. Yes, the issue does get complicated, but that is not what's at loggerheads for opponents of this religion. The problem is that the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses override the secular authorities in determining the veracity of accusations which exist regarding sexual abuse that happens on the inside. Now, when you combine this with the excommunication issue, what develops is yet another layer of victimization, re-victimization, traumatization, re-traumatization, and further barriers for survivors of such abuse to find protection, succor, and treatment for damages that have been done to them. Now, this is a complicated issue, and I'll agree that when ex-witnesses online center their entire argument around the two-witness rule, they've missed the point. Like the other issues, there's room for nuance here. And I don't expect everyone to have to know the legislation just so they can participate in their religion. It's a little different for those who hold position in the organization. They should be abreast on the legislation surrounding reporting statutes. And it would do these ones a lot of good to do extrinsic research of their own from just what the society provides. The Jehovah's Witnesses have thrown a number of elders under the bus for following the policies laid out for them in various clerical publications. So aside from elders who are routinely involved in these issues, I appreciate this is a little bit over the heads of rank-and-file witnesses. But if you do have the mental capacity to understand this issue, it is morally incumbent upon you to inform yourself. Why? Well, because your voluntary donations may be used to defend a pedophile or institutional scandal or other depredations. Anyway, this information is accessible online. Inform yourself. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, don't be like the Nazi and Soviet enablers you've rightly spoke out against throughout history. I repeat, perhaps no other organization has held their countrymen to account so beautifully as the Jehovah's Witnesses in this regard. My point is, follow the angels of your better nature and speak out against your own leadership when such things happen in your midst. You see, unlike many of the ex-witnesses online who just want to watch this religion burn, my message is profoundly different. I'm not telling you to leave your faith. I'm exhorting you to fight for it. Follow the wonderful example of your religious leaders who took to the courtroom and argued brilliantly in behalf of human dignity and conscience. Be proud of your heritage. Follow that wonderful example by in turn keeping your leaders honest. It doesn't have to be public. In fact, perhaps it's better in private. Write to your respective branch that you intend to stay loyal to your baptism and your conscience, but inform them that their mishandling of these matters are not becoming of the role they say Jesus laid out for them in the gospel. Hold them to account. Besides, isn't that a well-established scriptural teaching? Didn't David call out Saul? Didn't Nathan call out David? Didn't Paul correct the first century leadership? Hey, it ain't my book, but you know I'm right about this. It's too late for me. I don't believe in the teachings anymore. But you do. Nowhere in this video have I told you to reject this religion's authority if you're a member. I respect your viewpoint, and I think you can even hold it quite rationally. I'm not like the John Cedars channel or other malcontents online who are evangelists of their own stripe. I'm not saying you should leave. I'm saying you should stay and you should fight. And any friend or family who is worth their salt would tell you no different. Now we come to the part about certain alternatives if you're plagued by doubt and are considering leaving this religion. First and foremost, if you just can't bring yourself to trust the organization anymore, well, as someone who's experienced this, that just doesn't go away. No amount of intellectual acrobatics will cause you to unsee what you've seen. So your ghosting this group may be an unavoidable consequence. If, however, you're just an open-minded person who is following the society's advice to keep testing whether you're in the faith, or like the Bereans who Paul commended for their inquisitive nature, here's my advice. Be a force for good and progress in this religion. The biblical story in a metaphorical sense is absolutely true when it speaks about biting from the fruit of the knowledge of good and bad. Listen, if you really want to do the distance in philosophy and the fundamental character of knowledge, that is knowledge in metaphysics, knowledge in epistemology, which is the knowledge of knowledge, and especially in the knowledge of ethics, which is precisely what philosophy is all about, it's an endless and utterly mind-bending experience. If you go looking out there for some doubt-free ideology, something that answers all your questions and gives you hope, you're not going to find it. Now, the governing body goes to the other extreme and says, questions are fine so long as you stay and don't cause us too much trouble. My point is, I respect people sticking with it despite not having it all figured out, but it's important you know where your blind spots are. So say you're in this particular circumstance, you're a doubting Thomas, and you're wondering what to do. Should you stay or should you leave? It's a tough decision. But there are people in this organization who serve in Bethel or as elders and ministerial servants who've lost their philosophical innocence, you could say. They bit from the apple. I maintain that it's still possible to be a force for good and positive change. You might have to take what the religion says with a metaphorical grain of salt. But just because you've woken up a bit doesn't mean you now have to leave and get all angry or start a YouTube channel, lose all your family, yada, yada, yada. There are a number of basic needs that the Jehovah's Witness religion does fill. Trust me, you could do much worse than stay and contend with a little self-doubt. Just because you leave your religion, let's assume you take that action, it doesn't mean you're now a free thinker, such as an atheist might tell you. There are a number of views I've not expressed publicly, views I hold that are grounded in reason, yet are nevertheless heretical and taboo to say in our culture. The fact that you can pound your fist and say you think for yourself doesn't make it so. Although many ex-witnesses have their justifications, I'm generally very disappointed in how dogmatic they become in the opposite direction. It is incredibly fashionable to be irreligious these days. The fact that you left a religion doesn't mean you're now a courageous defender of truth. If you're really going to explore mind and the nature of belief, you are bound to find yourself holding views that are tremendously unpopular. Not just by Jehovah's Witnesses, but by society at large. So you're not necessarily saving yourself any heartache by turning Martin Luther and leaving. Take that into consideration. It's something I've learned since I left. I'm not instructing you to hypocritically preach one thing and believe another. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you can give yourself freedom to think without becoming an iconoclast. Now finally, I'd like to tell you about something that has enriched my own life, and I even believed it in some measure while I was a witness. It wasn't implicitly contradictory. Actually, as you follow my channel, it's something echoed throughout the Bible and other holy books. So I'm not proselytizing another religion to you. What I'm presenting to you is more like the ground of knowledge itself. It's a discussion regarding the essential character of knowledge. What I talk about on my channel is the law of attraction. The value of this philosophy became very important to me as I studied existentialism in philosophy. So here's the thing. Searching for truth is not enough. We like to comfort in telling ourselves that truth is all important, don't we? But us human beings are very bad at that, because there's no limit to truth, yet there's only so much of you. And we have this addicting and profoundly seductive force within us that causes us to see evidence which confirms our present biases. You're not exempt, I'm not exempt, nobody is. So searching for truth isn't enough. As Werner Heisenberg said, what we observe is not nature herself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning. Atheists, for example, pride themselves on seeing reality clearly despite their worldview being rather bereft of hope or consolation. And I know many atheists who are just waiting for death, who feel their lives have no ultimate purpose. Alternatively, there are others who think that a temporary existence can still have purpose. Just because a pleasant meal or experience ends doesn't necessarily imply it was meaningless. See, logic is not a tyrant, it's a tool. So you can hold any belief without despairing at all of its implications. I know ones who think the message of the witnesses is dismal to the core. Others find it maximally comforting. Truth has nothing to do with the various ways it can be perceived positively or negatively. But here's where existentialism changed me. If you don't tune your perceptions to celebrate existence, meaning, peace, contentment, and all those benevolent things, then your mind will slowly self-destruct. So let's assume for the moment that life is bereft of any lasting value or ultimate purpose. Unless you're prepared to end the show, what good is it to be right and miserable? Now, I need to make clear, this is distinct from wish thinking or delusion. I'm saying, like Heisenberg, that nature is responsive to our methods of questioning. In other words, reality is constituted by mind. This is consistent with Scripture, by the way. It's consistent with atheism. It's consistent with any belief, because it is the very essence of belief. It's the ground of knowledge. Just as there are rich who are miserable and poor who are happy, whatever it is you hold to be true can be perceived in potentially infinite ways. Why not choose attitudes that enhance existence? If you're struggling to understand this, I want you to subscribe. Intuitively, we all kind of know this to be true, what I was laying out there. But my channel is full of great scientific information to help you understand it better. Tell me what you think of this video below in the comments. If you're a witness, I hope you stick around and engage with me. I've always enjoyed the perspectives offered by my religious friends and family. This equally applies to non-witnesses and ex-witnesses too. I know there are a number of you out there who are righteously hostile to certain realities in the religion. I also know that you haven't exactly rid yourself of doubt in your journey either. I don't have certainty to sell you, but I have come across some incredibly unifying information, which has changed my life, and I know it'll transform yours as well. Thanks again. My name is Derek London, and we'll see you again very soon. Hey folks, did you enjoy this video? Hit them bloody like and subscribe buttons already. I come out with new content every week, and if the topic I just spoke on interests you, continue down this rabbit hole by clicking one of those cards on this screen. You stayed till the end of this one, I am sure you will love the next one. Many thanks for watching, until next time.